Are we all ready? We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll consider the minutes from the last meeting. Do you have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes of
May 13th.
May 13th. Thank you very much.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the May 13, 2020 meeting. All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Did we receive any public comments? Did anything come in?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
One thing nobody talks about.
Is there anybody,
We should have a pandemic every time it happens. Nobody else has.
any other audience members that want to talk? Okay.
Nobody sign in.
All right. So the first item on the agenda is page 39, General Fund, Egfr, and Southwood.
Before I start, just a couple of things. I'd like to thank the council and the committee for the budget that gave me last year. Our public works team was able to get a lot of things done with that budget, and we very much appreciated that. So I want to say that. And secondly, for most of you that know me, you know I have a hearing disorder, and because our microphones are not on today, if you could please help me by just speaking loud like me.
What'd you say?
Okay, you got it. I appreciate that. All right, let's jump into ECFR. Previously, I managed just the Southwind portion of this segment of our budget, but recently Jeff transitioned his responsibilities to me, so I have it all. The focus that I'll be working on this year is to help the Parks Committee get our stewardship plan updated. They're well into that effort, and I think that'll be our priority. Other than that, there's not a significant change as it stands with the budget on this. Questions on that segment?
This is more of a policy question from the committee. Has there been any discussion about resources off the property? Because we were talking a long time ago about thinning some of the north, east sector. I don't know what the price for timber is right now, but at the time it was poor. We could literally see some resources coming out of that.
So if I heard you correctly, you're talking about projects outside of the ECFR, in the Southwind area, like along the highway, the entrance of the Scotch broom removal?
No, it's in the, there is a portion of the ECFR
Okay.
where we were talking a long time ago about thinning
Okay.
inside.
Okay.
I don't know if any of those timbers are marketable. I don't know if we've done any research to find out.
I haven't, but I could do that.
Just curious, I'm not promoting thinning them.
Okay.
I'm curious to see where the market would lie and when they might be potential.
Okay.
Just
Take that as an action item.
So Karen, is the beaver restoration just totally off the table?
It is and it isn't. The stewardship committee had taken the lead on pursuing grant funding for that. We've pretty much been told we were going to get that money, and then COVID hit. And so they've been advised that they're not going to get those funds. The city had also put in some dollars in the kitty. I doubt that that's going to go forward, but that could change. And so the desire is for that to still happen. If there's grant money, they're ready to go on it. But as it stands right now, it doesn't look like they're going to get anything.
thank you.
Karen, does it look like there's going to be grant money maybe in the future?
There is. I mean, the small business allotment folks that I've talked to in pursuit of the warrant Wastewater Way intersection, we were gonna chase that. So far, they said that all applications are still gonna go in June first as scheduled. That could change, but right now, that's an example of a grant that's still on. So some of them are and some aren't. I know the folks from DEQ that get grant money to, and different types of federal funding to monitor our beach, ocean water, all that's been taken away. And so some of it is, some of it isn't, and we're just kind of learning as we chase each of these.
How about the beaver restoration, is that going to, do you think there'll be money in the future for that?
Honestly, I do. I think that that was a project, there was enough passion behind it that, and it wasn't a hugely expensive project. I think that, and this is just Karen's editorial comment, no one's told me this, I think that that has an opportunity to come about.
And the city was partnering with the Watershed Council for that, and the Watershed Council does still have that project pretty high on their list, and so it's staying as a priority there. It's just, there's not as much funding available from OWEB at this particular time, but it will continue to be pushed from the Watershed Council perspective as well.
Has anybody told the beavers? Because they're really working up there.
Yeah, they're there.
During that last high water bit that we had, there's a lot of beaver cuts, fresh, washout, which is intriguing. That means there's a lot of new beavers.
Huh, interesting.
Just FYI.
Jason?
Get on.
Beavers.
It's an enforcement issue. Okay, anything else on ECFR Southland? Parks next? All right. Again, not a lot of, change to our baseline budget. You'll hear me say baseline each time because as Bruce talked to you in the opening comments, that's really with our starting point, just to keep the doors open, keep our infrastructure operating efficiently, but with no flaw. Okay? So you have the same thing with parks. There are some desired projects that you'll see there, at the bottom. One is to take care of our asset, which is our parks building that needs siding and, a roof. We have an estimated quote for that is there, but we did not receive the funding for it. The other project is the stairs on Oak and the stairs at Sitka are in need of being rebuilt. And so again, we have quotes for those, and we would consider both of those shovel-ready projects if we were to get the funding to be able to pursue that. Lastly is the rate study, the XDC review, and you're gonna see that with every category here in my budget. Our, SDCs have not been, modified for over 12 years. That was something that was on Cruz's list, and it's definitely on mine. Jeff was able to get his, building fees updated, and I would have liked to have been able to do our SDCs at the same time, and we just were not able to do that, funding-wise. The, consultant company that worked with Carolyn and the Public Works Committee on the rate model study, would be the same company I'd like to use for the SDCs, because they're very familiar with our rates and how we have things structured in Cannon Beach. I got an informal, quote from him, and it came in at $30,000. I had, made a conservative estimate of about $10,000, thinking, he could probably do it for that. But I added roads and parks to that. Some municipalities include roads and parks in their SDCs, and Cannon Beach does not. And I'd like to have us explore that, when we do the review. So his quote came back at $30,000. I think that'd be a project that would be very advantageous for the city to consider. Questions on parks?
You said if additional money became available, you'd prioritize these shovel-ready ones. Do you have a particular order that you're thinking of?
Obviously, the SDCs are important to me, and that's revenue for the city. But I also have to say that, just like our recycle business, too long to take on siding, re-roofing, it was expensive, and the parks building will be the same. If we do that, if we wait too long, it gets more costly to make the repairs. That if I was to choose between one or the other, I would definitely go FCCs first.
Karen,
Yep.
explain community forestry.
Community forestry, hang on a second, let me look at my cheat sheet back here. I had to go back and remind myself what that was for too. I believe that that is the fee, like a tax, that, hang on a second.
Looking at trees like.
Yeah, it is a fee like a tax that the city homeowners pay for the forestry to fight, areas that are not city, and it's not under the fire department jurisdiction. Good example of that is on South Hemlock, in the apartments I lived in across from the, Wave B&B down there. There is a area between the apartments I lived in and the next house where Lila and them live that is covered under this very tax. So the forestry, would manage a fire that got started there, not our Cannon Beach Fire Department. So there's areas like that throughout town that fall under that, and it's a tax they collect each year for that.
Okay.
This is listed as an expense. Are we talking of the same thing?
I think Karen's thinking about in the Forest Reserve, there's that fire fee.
Right.
This one is the, tree removal,
Oh,
trimming.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you,
She
Jen.
just had to go down and see what I did.
Yep. That's the assessment and the removal of any trees in our city right away. Apologies, got that mixed up. Any questions on parks?
Well, just because I'd like to just bring it up as a discussion item, is that something that, we could talk about, whether that's a necessary expense moving forward?
On
At least this coming year?
On that last item that we just talked about?
The community forestry, the $23,000.
It would mean that if someone called me and said there's a tree in the city's right of way that we think is gonna fall on our house, I mean, the first thing I would do is have an arborist come out and assess that to see if it's a hazardous tree or diseased or at risk of falling down. And so that's where that money would come from.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm advocating whether that we should do it or not, I'm just asking whether it's that.
unfortunately, we spend quite a bit each year with arborists assessing trees in our community. And,
Yeah, I've noticed that the market uptake in trees that are coming down the right way. So, I question how many of them truly need to come down, but what seems to happen mostly is alder trees have a much shorter lifespan than conifers, and eventually they do need to come down. Like I said, it's just for discussion.
Right.
Thank you, Karen.
We have a lot of those, Sitka trees that haven't really, fared well over the last couple of years. I could see the, potential of some of those really needing some attention this year, you know, ones that are all looking really brown.
Mm-hmm.
the greater concern for me would be watching the aphid impacts that we've had, because up until recently, and you see a fair amount of them starting to have new growth. During the winter, you really couldn't tell if it was gonna make it or not make it. And so I think that we will end up having to do, reassessment on some of those trees. We had Jeff, our arborist, come through initially and tell us how bad he thought that had hit, our trees. And the first pass was, he didn't think it was as bad as everybody, it seemed shocking to everybody at first. But he didn't think it was as bad. But now as spring comes out and you see the ones that don't have the new tip growth on there, it's obvious that they're not gonna make it. And those are the ones that could potentially become hazardous, and we would have to remove them.
Two things that I thought of also is, this is the fund where we would draw from for replanting also.
Say again, Sam, you would.
If we were to do any replanting,
Okay.
this fund would be where we would draw that from.
It would be one of the funds, yeah.
And also, a larger spruce tree I've got one in mind that's up on Spruce. Could pay for itself, if we do it right. So if we have to take it down, there is a value to it. Should at least pay for its own being cut down. Depends on the market and stuff like that.
Yeah,
As long as we pay attention to those things.
Parking, not a lot of change here. Last year, we were able to put, new bollard lights in to replace our old ones that had been hit with vehicles and or were broken. So that was a great thing to get the parking lot lit properly. We also put new bollards in, to prevent vehicles from hitting the new lights, because big trucks coming in, the delivery trucks primarily, they come in and out of the parking lot, whether it's at the post office or at the market. They can't navigate those turns real well, and, so we did some repositioning, and so far so good. We were able to do some cleanups of our signs and some, shrubbery and things that were dead, and we could get in there and make some replacements. So we were able to give our parking lot a little bit of a facelift as the second phase of what we did the previous year when we did the slurry. That's gonna give us some light on that parking lot.
Any questions on parking? We'll go to the restrooms.
Okay, let's talk restroom, maintenance and, litter. It's probably one of the most exciting categories for me, because last year you guys afforded us the budget to replace the, toilets and sinks and faucets. I never thought I'd be so excited to put gel fixtures in our bathrooms, but, it was exciting. Trevor and I even took photos of each other, you know, sitting on the new throne. Anyway, it has been very successful in that we have had one. Yeah, take that in the spirit of it. We've only had one, actual repair call associated with the toilet, which is unbelievable, because the previous year we had spent, just under $20,000 on maintenance, and it was all associated with plugged toilets, broken faucets, sinks that, you know, were continuously running, so on and so forth. And keep in mind, this is just Les Shirley and the Second Street bathrooms, both sides. But like I say, today we've had one plumbing call there. And the expense so far on the budget year to date is $5,000, and that wasn't the one plumbing call. That was associated with our rusted out, broken exhaust fans that would no longer come on in the bathroom when we started to have mildew and moisture build up in there. So we got that fixed. And then our hand dryers, were failing, so we were able to go ahead and replace those. So our bathrooms now in those locations have been completely redone, and we are seeing the benefits of that change out. So again, I thank you for allowing us to do that, because that was a good thing to do. I would love to be able to, go after Midtown, at some point, but that's gonna be a project down the road, but I'm not gonna let you lose sight of that, because that project would be one we would wanna do a rebuild and stop using porta potties out there as an added cost to the city. So, the focus this year on bathrooms, our next, cost savings will be to work with affordable carpet care and driving the cost down of our supplies. And so I've worked with Jay, and we're finding suppliers that can, give better pricing on soaps that we use, the toilet papers we use, without going to such a thin toilet paper that they're using 3 times as much because it's so thin. So there's a balance in that, and still get some competitive pricing. So that's where we're putting our focus this year. Questions on bathrooms?
Call the Forest Reserve, page 50.
Okay, on the reserve, the dollar amount you see there, this is the prior year's ending balance that was carried forward, so we didn't request any changes on that particular amount for that year.
Any questions there?
Yeah, just where the, money comes from.
Just, left over from, well, we look at the historical data, we can probably figure that out.
It's been sitting there a long time.
It's been,
That's my
exactly.
understanding.
Yeah.
Transfer in from the general fund in 2014, it looks like. You look at page 49. And I don't know what that, it's really, meant to be for, $6,394. So it's just been since 2014.
Okay, I do need to get, that specific, because my next question is, what is it that we, it's there just to be able to pay for anything that happens within the EC?
I was here when that fund was formed, so I really don't know the initial intent.
I might be able to add to that, Brandon. I think it was a setup because we were going to get thinning revenues, and those revenues would go, those would go into the reserve fund to go for future maintenance in the reserve.
Dad, my recollection, this amount is partially what was left over from when we did the cut for the logs that were dropped in the creek. Some of that was sold also, and
For
that's
the fish
paid for the
habitat.
helicopter, and paid for just the electric. So, yeah, that's what that was.
But, so any project moving forward, we take first from this fund and then have to make a transfer if we need to do something there?
I suppose that's up to us. There's no have to.
Well, like, for instance, the trees that come down across the road, that cause problems in the past.
That's good.
Just if you wanted to do a major project, you could, fund this reserve from the general fund, and then you would just have that whole project in one fund, so you can see the activity that occurred. You could do it that way. You could take the money out of the reserve and put it in the general fund, and do the project out of the, Ecola Southwind Fund that we just talked about. You could do that. You could do it either way.
I mean, it's just not that much money.
It isn't.
Lori, don't we do, don't we fund the ACFR budget out of the general fund?
Yes.
The operating?
The operating.
Yeah, so there's every year there's general fund money goes in on the operating side, which was the first account Karen talked about.
Okay, thank you.
So why keep anything in this fund?
And he's rolling over year after year after year, why don't we
Make it available back
For
in the general fund?
operational costs, you could do that, yes. I think so, unless it's restricted in some way.
It's unrestricted.
Well, for example, if the Beaver project, which there isn't any funds in the previous, the Ecola and Southwind stewardship plan, if something ended happening with beavers in the reserve, could not the money from the reserve fund be used for a beaver project or other projects that the stewardship plan calls out?
Okay, so I should have read the narrative here on page 49. There is a resolution that speaks to this fund, and so we would have to stay within the limitations of that resolution. So, yeah, we probably should just leave it here.
The
So maybe revisit it next budget season when we can, reevaluate that resolution and take a look at that. Make a note to do that.
The narrative seems to fit in with Carolyn's
Yes.
suggestion.
And it gives us a tool in case something unbudgeted comes up, specific to the ECFO. Not much of a tool, but a tool.
All right.
Any other questions about the Forest Reserve Fund? We'll go to the recycling reserve or fund, page 74.
Recycle, no significant changes here. Recycling is pretty much recycled, but we've really dug deep to try to find ways to reduce our cost and recycle, and, including, working with Recology to be able to, fund a seasonal person to help manage the volume that we just continue to see go up at our recycling. We are definitely not providing recycling to just Cannon Beach residents. There's no doubt about the fact that we have residents coming from other communities utilizing our recycle. And we tracked that all last year, not by, perfected tabulation, but Andrew pretty much knows everybody that comes through there, and he knows the person that's not from here, and not, ones that are. And some folks readily, volunteer that they're from another community, and because of COVID or any other changes, their, recycle locations may have started charging, or they have stopped allowing certain types of things. And so we feel the overflow of that. We felt quite a bit of it when Manzanilla's, little location down there closed for, several months. We felt a real uptick. And so we have worked hard to try to find a way to manage that. And shy of going to some sort of a token or permit, process where somebody has a sticker on their windshield or something on their key ring that identifies them as a Cannon Beach resident. I don't know how we can, manage the non-Cannon Beach folks that come to us. Andrew and the team have told me in the past years they have denied some people coming, and that all they do is heave their stuff along the highway, and that they don't want that. And so, how do you find that out, But this is a cost that is going up to the city, and so, thank goodness for Recology being good partners with us and, helping us staff a seasonal person to help man it, because, just the yard waste alone has been explosive this year, just because everybody's locked in at home and they're doing yard work, Cardboard is down, but yard waste is up big time, so.
And we don't make any money from the yard waste.
We don't, no.
I doubt we make any money from cardboard.
We don't.
So the surcharge that's there, what is the source of that fund, that, in the, resources portion, where it says recycled surcharge, which seems to be where the income for it's coming from?
Well, obviously, and Lori, speak up if I misstate something here, because obviously our residents pay for this, right? But it's not necessarily a revenue generating in the sense that we're making anything off of it. I mean, every year the cost is going up. Yeah, the cost to the customer goes up slightly, but it's not at a level that we're making any kind of a margin on it.
So this is coming from Recology, from the services that all of the citizens are paying?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
It's really a franchise fee,
Okay.
like our Pacific Core Electric franchise fee. We are giving permission for Recology to come into our town and provide garbage service for our citizens. And in doing so, they pay 16% of the gross revenues that are derived to come in for the privilege of allowing them to conduct business and make a profit in our town. That's really what it is. It's got this terminology, I don't know really how that came to be.
So the other franchise fees we get really come into the general fund. This is really the only one that comes into an enterprise fund.
Probably, you guys know the history, your council probably said, we're gonna use that revenue, because it would be a discretionary revenue if you so chose it to be. And it could go into the general fund, could go anywhere you want it to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, but you probably.
No, it actually did, initially, and then all we did was we took funds out of the general fund to pay for the recycling. Initially, recycling kind of paid for itself, because cardboard was valuable at that time. That's changed, and the whole process, of course, yard waste wasn't involved in the beginning, so it was pretty small, but again, it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think, I totally appreciate what we've done here with the budget. I think the council needs to have a topic on this in a work session sometime this year. I'm not saying soon, please, but to really address the value of the recycling system compared to the expense of it. And I think that's something we need to do. It's disappointing that recycling can't pay for itself in a human state, but we need to figure this out.
Why aren't we showing any, recycled sales in the budget? In prior years, we've always shown some sales, cardboard and whatever.
In the tank.
What's that?
The cardboard, we're just not getting much revenue at all. So I thought, well, I don't think we need to like bank on that next year, so left it out.
So that's the only thing that we sell,
Cardboard,
cardboard.
and then we have associated freight to haul the cardboard.
Yeah, it costs us
To
to
sell.
haul it.
So you're making very little money off that cardboard sale.
Well, I think as Sam pointed out, that is something that we need to discuss with the council. But I think clearly, I can't, in good conscience, argue putting anything like that into the landfill as a solution is worthwhile.
No, but I mean, should we discuss a fee structure? Should we discuss some other
Absolutely.
aspects of this? If it's something the community wants to maintain,
Yeah.
since you've got a tub in your own garage that, you can put all this stuff in.
Well, that's not entirely true.
Not the yard waste, obviously, but,
And glass.
but, like Karen was saying, the yard waste has been the hub of this entire pandemic. I mean, everybody goes over there twice a day.
And we make nothing on that.
And we don't make anything on that. And that, to me, is a commodity that somebody is getting. Because yard waste, when it's properly, chewed up and, done, turns into something valuable.
But you have to pay to create that value.
Do have the opportunity to drive it themselves for free to the transfer station. I mean,
Or dump it on the highway.
yeah, sexy.
Lori, what about glass? Is that costing us to get rid of?
We don't pay to have glass picked up and taken away. They used to, recycle glass, you could, make a profit on that, but most of what we get is, alcohol type bottles, and there's no redeeming value. They don't take colored glass anymore and recycle or anything like that, so you can't make money on that.
So what happens to the glass that we put in the bins then?
It goes to ecology and they process it, but most colored glass ends up in our landfill. It does not get recycled.
Good to know.
There used to be a big location in Hood River. I used it when I had the winery to process the, green glass, and they haven't done that for several years.
It's actually, at least the last time I heard, which was last year sometime, glass is taken to the big, either the big reserve in Portland, there's a big pile, as you're heading out to the airport, there's a big pile of it, or up into Vancouver, there's another one. In both of those cases, it's loaded onto a train and taken to Idaho. And Idaho is the closest state that has the ability to process it into usable stuff. Oregon does not have the ability to process it. There's been several discussions to change the Oregon bottle bill, which restricted what you could do with used glass. You might actually turn it into insulation or any of the other stuff that actually would be valuable. But it has to go all the way to Idaho. So your little bottle that you put in the thing gets trucked all the way up to Idaho before it becomes any value to anybody.
Transport cost of some of the aspects of recycling costs you more than what you're making on the recycling, unfortunately. We've worked with Ecology on their printed material that they send out that stipulates that Cannon Beach is for, the drop-off is for Cannon Beach residents only. They did not have that on their, material before, and, when I moved into my home and got my new mailer from them saying, welcome new client, I'm looking on there and I'm thinking, how good is it set, so little things like that, we're trying to catch and tighten it up to where we can at least get it back to just our residents and manage our volume a little bit better, and try to control the escalation of the cost. We worked hard with the contract last year with the college, to just control the cost, and they really stepped up and worked well with us. They continue to do that, but we've gotta get down deeper, I think, with that. Pleased to hear you about the work session.
Okay, let's move on.
Any other questions about recycling? Recycling reserve, page 76.
And basically, that's just the prior year ending balance carried forward. That is the fund that we actually used when we decided to re-roof the, buildings in prior years, so that is one thing that we used to do that.
So how did we go from 76,000?
It's not in there. The re-roofing project, is it just, was that done in this year?
This past
2019. I know, I see it in the colony, but
So,
something's off.
yeah, something's off, I'll leave it to that.
What's missing, Lori?
Well, in the column,
Adopted
on
budget.
page 76,
yeah.
the 2019 actual, we should have a capital outlay for $66,500.
Oh, for the roofing project.
And then, so
So-
the,
And that's the 9,825.
So that's where the 76 went, and now we've got, okay, that makes sense.
And I'll make that fix.
Okay.
Any other questions about the recycling reserve? Water fund, page 80.
All right. Page 79, water, right? So now we get into the meat of the matter.
We'll just start talking.
Yeah. Again, no change to the baseline. Pretty much straightforward from what we, had for last year's operational. You'll see, some desired projects there down at the bottom, the rate study again, SDCs again will show up in each of these, as I mentioned before. And you also see the project that was desired is the fire hydrant maintenance. I've been working with the fire chief at our firehouse to talk about, contracting them to do our annual flow testing, our maintenance on all of our hydrants, and, painting of our hydrants. It's that time where we need to go through town and clean up and paint our hydrants. We don't have a paint booth. When we got a cost estimate of developing a paint booth, it was just cost prohibitive to vent it properly for the safety of our workers, so we went back to looking at contracting this out. And so that's something that I think would be beneficial for the fire department as well as the city, if we were to be able to partner on something like that. Seaside hired a retired or contracted a retired firefighter to go through Seaside and do everything on their hydrants. You have a broken chair? Again, not a essential or critical project, but one that needs some attention. That's, we did our own flow testing last year on the new hydrants we put in, but this is something we should do regularly. And then Bruce talked about the, water resiliency projects. I don't know if I need to go into that much. We have submitted our letter of interest, of course. That's a $14 million project. The deadline for this quarter's letter of interest is June 15th. Ready for that. The meter modules, that loan has been awarded to us. The contract's been signed. We're currently working through the last aspects of the reviews that have to be done before we can do our first drawdown on that.
Sorry, have you jumped over to the reserves?
Yeah, I did, I'm sorry. Yes. I'm kind of doing both, sorry about that.
Okay.
And so, for that project, we had originally said it was gonna take 5 months to do. Our goal, based on what's happened with the budget, is to stretch that out for a year, so that we don't have to pay that loan back in this coming year. We have the interest budgeted already, so we've got that identified in the budget, so we would pay interest only, and we would take the 12 months of that budget year to complete the project instead of doing it in 5 months, and then having to start paying the loan back within that. As soon as you do the project, complete the project, you gotta start paying. So that's a 1%, 20-year project, and it's, 50% forgivable, as we've talked about before.
So that's the loan interest we see on the water fund under debt service?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're you're talking on the water reserve page down?
Yeah, kind of did both, sorry.
That's all right.
I did it as a twofer. So that's really the highlights of water are those. Now, I do want to talk about, a couple of, items here. On the water resiliency, study, you see the 45 and the 155. The 45, I think you remember Bruce talked about as our site, study for the, reservoir, the tank. And then the 155 is for the actual engineering.
That's the engineering of the
line replacement.
The line replacement.
Right, and so that project is gonna enable us to get water to the community within 72 hours, which is part of our emergency management plan. And so again, it's a master plan project, but I think we're getting 2 bangs for our buck there, is that it gives us that 72-hour, goal and time frame to get water to the community. It also starts our major master plan project.
And underwater resiliency plan, you have 45, but in this year, 2019-20, it's about 100,000 there. I'm assuming that didn't happen.
Correct.
Okay, so that expense didn't happen in this current budget year.
That's correct, that's for next year.
Okay.
So I have a question about your meter modules.
Yes.
We had a fairly lengthy discussion about this in the last budget session. And, in the minutes, you said you could get it done for about 400,000, and now it's back up to 624. What
Went
happened?
ahead and processed the loan for that total amount. We estimate we're gonna use half of that, and so half of what we use would be forgivable. But we processed the paperwork for that total loan amount.
So what do you use the rest of it for?
We would only draw down what we need.
So this is the maximum that you expect, but you really expect the project to be
That's right.
cost less than it. So the loan, you would end up realizing, if you will, would be whatever is the actual expenses.
And you're only charged interest on what you draw? The whole thing?
We don't pay interest or pay back anything we don't use. You're only paying interest on what you use, and you're
That's
paying
what I
back
meant.
half of
What you draw from the loan is
So you
only,
think
you
you're
don't
gonna be
pay
able to do it
interest on.
for around 300,000 now?
Yes,
And you're doing it,
325, I think was our total number.
are you doing it in-house, or you
We are doing it in-house, yeah. And we did verify with the
loan people?
yeah, sorry, that wouldn't change the dynamics of our loan, because when we originally submitted our loan app, we weren't sure if we were gonna do it in-house or not. We were still, going back and forth on that. We wanted to make sure that if we did it in-house, it didn't eliminate us from qualifying for the funding. And, because it would save us quite a bit of money to do it in-house. That's part of the, variance of the numbers, Richard, in that dollar amount we talked about, is doing it in-house versus, subcontracting it out. And so once we verified that we still qualified, we could still pursue the loan, doing it in-house, that's when we nailed down our numbers.
So can we use the other 325 for something else? Or does it have?
I'd be happy to.
Well,
I know,
there was a lot of other water projects that.
if it was a water project, we could. I don't know if our finance director wants me to do that, but.
I'm not
sure
we could do that.
I think that if the loan is for the meter, and we spend less than 24, only get the loan funds for what we spent. We don't get the rest of it.
So you can't sneak a water line in
Take
300,000.
project.
Well,
Yeah,
if
under
we
the
told
water.
them it was just meters, we might get away with it, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that would pass the smart test.
Yeah, we'd have to check.
It has to be just the meters, because if the water line has to be for water lines, it could be a different water line, but it has to be a
Yeah.
water line, meters will be just the meters.
Okay.
Okay.
Good try, though, I like that. You do not want me to spend anything, but want me to spend the whole thing, I like that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, what's wrong
Something else
with
that needs doing with the meters?
I'm sorry?
Is there something else that needs doing with the meters?
Other than just the prepping of the actual site, they're gonna do a lot of maintenance, brush clearing and things like that, but as the meter and or the module itself, no.
Okay.
As it stands right now, we have no, modules on hand. And we, as Daryl has done the meter reads every month, we have batteries that are failing as we speak, so it's getting more difficult to do the reads because they don't read correctly as the batteries die. So I'm happy that we got this because it's definitely, we definitely have to do something about it, so.
Your intent is to start at the beginning of the fiscal year?
As soon as we can take this first drawdown, yes, yeah.
I have one other question, that, what is your goal for the contingency, amount for each?
And I'm glad you brought up the contingency, because as, Lori touched on in the very beginning, I think, Nancy, you picked up on the big amounts of the contingencies. In past years, you typically see somewhere around 10%. I think George used to question us that 10 was too low, and we bumped it up to 15. Lori did something different this year than what she's done in past years, and that was to take that ending fund balance, and she added it to the contingency, then recalculated her percentage, and that's why you see the percentage so much larger, those two things combined. That's not something that I have been used to seeing, but that's something that, a change that she's made this year, so that's why those contingency dollar amounts or percentages seem so much more significant. Just a minor adjustment, I'll have to get used to it in my mind, but honestly, when I look at contingency, you guys, that's money that I say I can't spend anyway, so I don't consider or count on it. It's kind of like my 401K, it goes away and I don't even think about it being there, so that's how I look at the contingency. If I have a crisis, and I have to go to the boss and say, we're in trouble, we've had a storm, or we've had something we didn't predict, and obviously I know that it's there for me to ask for, but my intent is never to use that money.
Well, it seems, in the proposed budget, it seems, even a lot larger than, this year's current budget, even when you add the contingency plus the ending fund balance, 230, when you look at 2019 is 220, and this year it's 247. So it's gone up like $17,000 in contingency. And I would just wonder if perhaps it would be wise to, use at least a portion of that for like the SDC review, if that's really something that hasn't been done for 12 years. And, you know, with planning just doing it for the building funds, it seems like that might be an opportunity to at least get that in at this point without a whole lot of impact to what's on the budget here. Just a thought on that one.
We do want to make sure that we get water revenues coming in and collections as well.
Right.
Because that could impact cash flow.
Exactly.
And so we would need that of, we don't know, right, in this uncertain time. I feel like, you know, we should just maintain the balances and contingencies in case we do have a problem.
But if we were to see the revenue coming in a positive manner and at a run rate that we didn't necessarily plan on, we were thinking more conservatively, I would love to be able to ask for that.
And we can do that by just using contingency, taking this to council and asking them to increase the expenditures with the use of contingency, so that's an option as well.
I assume then that, if additional revenue does seem to be coming in, is that your priority in terms of the next thing you want to do, the SDC?
Definitely.
Okay.
That sounds to me like Public Works could mention that to us in the fall, just because we'll know numbers better from the income. So, that way you guys can. Alicia?
Yeah, as we covered, that was the thing that stood out to me in the budget, is that you have 4 or 5 places where the FTC revenue or the rate revenue has been eliminated from the bare bones budget. And so, that would be the first thing that I would advocate, is that you take care of your revenue stability long-term. And I read in the minutes last year where you had commented on a 5-year plan to do rate increases for utility rates. And I know that small annual changes add up to longer-term financial stability, and so you'll hear that from me, and probably not a lot else. Okay.
Thank you.
I agree.
Yeah, but hear all the expenses from these guys, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm a revenue girl.
I'm a revenue girl too.
Any more questions about the water fund or the water reserve fund? We'll move on to wastewater.
Hey. Again, not a change to our baseline, no additional asks there. Couple things I did want to talk about on our plant. Again, because the budget you afforded me last year, we were able to do some things that were badly in need of attention. Our plant is 13 years old, and we're beginning to see failures occur, and our maintenance items are getting more expensive. Just to kind of give you a list of some of the things that we had to deal with. This year, we had a control panel on our UV part of our plant that failed. We had to replace that at the tune of $30,000. That was not something that was optional for us to replace or not replace. It is part of the critical function of our UV treatment.
What's the UV treatment?
I'm sorry?
What is the UV treatment? I don't know if everybody understands.
That is where the UV light
Sterilizes.
the sludge that's going through there, if you will. Trevor, you could say it a little bit better than I can, that.
Yeah, it's used for disinfection of the final product of the effluent before it goes over to the pond, or the wetlands across the highway. So it's our last line of defense that kills off the bacteria that's bad for you.
So we don't have chlorine?
Yeah, we don't use chlorine.
And then at one of our blowers, we have 3 blowers in the very back building by the trail. One of those blowers failed, and we had to deal with that. That was just under $10,000.
And the blower creates all bubbles in there?
Creates the oxygen for the aeration basin that is involved with treatment.
For the bugs?
It feeds the fish, that's what I say.
Yeah. And then our ballast, where we have our UV bulb, was broken. We had to replace that, and our bank of bulbs. For the first time in my life, I realized how expensive those bulbs are out there, the UV bulbs, and so that was almost $24,000 for us to deal with. That was just one bank of bulbs. The other bank is probably gonna have to be dealt with this year. Our air actuator in the basin failed. Luckily, that was only $2,000. That was a little item of all the big ones we had to deal with last year, but that was something that could not be ignored. All these items are part of our the critical aspect of our operation. And then just recently, one of our wasting valves went out, so we're dealing with what the cost of that is gonna be.
So where does that come out of on the budget? I mean, what line item is that? Part of equipment repair and
That's
maintenance?
part of our equipment repair, yes.
If I just, Karen, if I could add one thing. One of the things that Trevor explained to me is that, our plant runs very well. And when you look at the numbers of what we're allowed to put out as far as, you know, whatever the metrics are, we consistently put out 5% of what we're actually allowed. So we're 95% ahead of the curve as far as our treatment. So, these folks do a great job, and it's worth supporting.
I think the, part of our plant with all these things going on, the part, that I think I was most proud of with my team is that Mike Brown has been acting as the wastewater lead for over a year now. We've had vacancy there. And, Mike's primary responsibilities in the past was to do our reads at our pump stations and so on. He didn't have a real great knowledge of the overall operation of the plant. He has grown exponentially in this past year and really just had to dive in and get his arms around it. A lot of it trial and error as these things broke. He had to get the manuals out, he had to make the phone calls, he had to call other cities and bounce things off of them. Obviously Trevor is a resource, but they try hard not to come to Trevor just out of pride. So Mike has done a phenomenal job, as our acting lead. Then his second cohort out there is Marty Parsons, who's been with us just barely 2 years. He's getting ready to take his, level 1 cert test here next week. And so he too came from off the street. His background was, the logging industry. He had a very sharp, mechanical mindset, so he's been able to get his arms around how a lot of these things work from a functional perspective, even if he doesn't understand what it means to the overall plant at the very initial moment. So the two of them have really grown together in this last year, and we've had quite a few crazy things happen that really push those guys to the limit. So I've been very proud of what they've been able to manage out there.
Mike is going for his 3.
Yes, Mike will go for his level 3 test, week after Marty. I'll talk, reserve here for a second, so I'm gonna bounce back and forth like I did water. The Matadisca cover, is one of our master plan projects. Again, that is a, low interest loan that we are pursuing, very close to being able to have that approved. It's going through an internal review right now. The state folks have told us that the next aspect of that is to do the review and then post a public notice for 30 days. And then at that point, they'll come back to us for us to give copies of all of our permits, our building permits and such. And we should be able to do some loan doc signing. And so that will be great to be able to get that covered after many years of wanting to cover our assets, everything from deteriorating with the elements, and do some upgrades at the same time. So that's a project on the books. You'll also see under the desired projects that were not funded, Haystack Pump Station. That was one of our projects identified for last year. That sits on adjacent to the home of Gene Cope here in Cannon Beach. Gene decided he would rather us not put a permanent generator there because it requires a larger footprint than what exists today. So that project's been modified to our maintenance of our wet well and such, and the upgrade of the controller panel in there. So that's a project that we would like to be able to pursue and finish. We have the new control panel, so some of our piece parts are already on hand and in place. We were able to buy them last year and stage things ready for that project to go. And then the Haystack pump station was going to be done at the same time as Sayuzla. Both of those were going to have permanent generators, and because Haystack didn't go forward, we didn't go forward with Sayuzla. So we've now paired that with Midtown. That would be our next pump station that we would put permanent generators at. And what I'm asking for on that particular project is just to get the initial design and engineer done with the intent to build the following year. Kind of get into that design engineer 1 year, build the next, and us do that teeter-totter and be able to pursue some of these low-interest loans like we have on the others. And then our 3-year bypass pump, that pump would enable us in an emergencies to be able to bypass a pump station completely. Utilizing that pump on a trailer, we take it out, hook it up. We have several of our pump stations that we would be able to use as that, and be able to bypass that pump station if we have some sort of a failure that we need to pull that off line, if you will. And then lastly, our core dewater decant project. It's not an expensive one. It's one the guys have asked for several years, and it always seems to get kicked off for more expensive, greater projects. But this is used anytime we have Vector work. It's almost like a colander, if you will. You put the everything from the Vector truck into this, and it separates the liquids from the solids prior to going and disposing of them. And like I say, it's not a big ticket item, but it's one that would be very valuable for our team to have.
So what do they do now that you don't have that tool?
It all
Do I
goes-
wanna know?
It all goes in the 4 ponds out there, the
Okay.
4 lagoons out there, and why this decant station is very important is because we're just adding more solids out to that, the lagoons out there, when our intent is to not add solids out there.
Right.
Because we already add the byproduct of sludge from the wastewater treatment plant out there, and as it sits now, Mother Nature is taking care of the levels for it. As we continually add the products that are in our wet wells, which is grease and stuff, it just adds to the issue, and Mother Nature has a hard time breaking down those products.
So if you're able to separate it with this, then what happens to the solids? Do they
It would get
shipped
disposed in a special container that Western Oregon Waste would take away, and
Pick it up,
they
take it out.
incinerate it.
I have a question, probably for Trevor. The generators at the pump stations, they kick in on their own for just general time, don't they?
Correct, they have once a week they run, just to run, they're on a cycle to run every week, just to start up and make sure everything transfers over okay. And at that time, if something fails, then we know about it and we get it fixed.
I had to explain that to somebody, and I was wanting to make sure I explained it right.
It's part of our routine that
Yeah.
we do. But even on the ones that are portable, we do the same thing. Fire them up.
So the one that you compared, one that says Facelet and Midway upgrade, that's really just the engineering?
Yeah,
work?
that's the preliminary, design and engineering to see what the construction cost would be. We need that in order to pursue the loan documents. You gotta have a dollar amount to put on there, and so they give us a preliminary, cost.
Seems like the logical thing to try to tackle in the budget year, so that you're ready next time around. Otherwise, the whole thing will get delayed another year.
Right.
Okay.
Right, that goal of trying to get on this, design and engineer 1 year and construct the next is with the idea. Kind of get the momentum going with that, because then it gives us some lead time to be able to pursue, whether it be grants or low-interest loans, or as the boss spoke earlier about federal funding that's part of the stimulus package to get, infrastructure rebuilt, people back to work. If they come and say, we've got X amount of millions, I'd love to have projects that I can just constantly trigger off every year. So we have to have that preliminary design and engineer just to know what the cost of them would be and what to ask for.
If I can add something on that, Karen.
Yep.
The term is shovel-ready, and what happened during the Great Recession is that when they went from doing grants to getting people back to work, if there was a public works project, because if you fund a public works project, there's all kinds of people get work as a result of that. So they would come in, if you had anything, and if you didn't have one, they would make one up for you, even if it didn't make any sense, because they just wanted people to get to work. There's no discussion about that happening imminently, but I believe that ultimately, if they want people to get back to work, infrastructure is the way to go. So, thanks, Karen. Sorry.
Sure.
Just a question on that. Do you literally have to be ready to put a shovel on the ground, or do you do any final detailed design work as part of that?
The more they want people, when and if this happens, they want people to get to work right now. So if you have a project, for example, Matanuska is perfect. We're ready, we have plans, all that. If we're set to go for a loan for it, but if they are looking for a project, we're ready to go with that, we have design. And that's where we're trying to get on the water tank and the water line, because those are such big ticket items that, that's exactly what it is they're looking for. If you're kind of close, they'll kind of say, okay, I'll get back to you, and then see if there's somebody else that's further along. They really don't even, well, my recollection is they really don't even evaluate the relative value of the project. It's how can you make it work?
Why don't we take some money out of the contingency and put it into the reserve and let Karen spend it on some of those kind of minor projects that she's got?
Yeah, I mean, especially that,
I mean, that's a big.
especially the engineering on the
Yeah, that's a big contingency. We're building a contingency that's about 3 times as big as it was last year.
And I mean, I guess I can understand why this contingency maybe is a little bit higher. You explained all of the issues that you had this year that were unexpected. But I mean, as Richard pointed out, that's a big jump from the contingency we have this year versus, what's in the budget that's proposed. And, you know, either, you know, SDCs or some of these engineering projects, I think it would be wise to kind of think about including those in the budget.
Do you think that it would be, in order to do that, would it be better to wait through the summer to see, you know, what the upcoming revenues would be through our, transient lodging tax, or to just go ahead and do it?
Well, these funds are all generated, I think, by rates, right?
Yeah, but
So we've got the rates.
yeah, but there is, I mean, if the hotels are only at maybe half capacity for however long that might be, they're not gonna use as much water, therefore the revenue might be down somewhat. So, although it's not CRT, you are correct that there could be a reduction in revenue because there would be a reduction in water use.
But could we put it in the budget for those small things, and with the understanding that
It'll pull
You
the
get-
trigger.
right until after the summer?
The reserve fund though isn't dependent on rates, because what's here has possibly come from the operational fund, but once it goes into the reserve fund, it cannot go back out.
Right.
So you're kind of safe to do some things here,
Right.
where I wouldn't recommend it in the operating fund.
Right, but I think you mean to use part of the
Yes,
contingency here.
yes.
But I would also say that there's a big contingency in the operating fund too, so either, perhaps transfer a little bit more into the reserve in order to do those projects, or work on one of the projects in the, total materials and services portion that was maybe reduced.
Can we fund the rate study on the reserve?
No. You don't need to.
Anyway, is there any we have any traction on moving some money from the, contingency of $474,000? Is that right, 474, into the reserve? Maybe like $100,000 or something, would that make sense?
I thought I was understanding you were proposing to use some of the contingency money up for the project, for design of the project in the reserve.
Either within the reserve or using some of the contingency that is in the wastewater fund, that is a very large percentage. And whether that be for a project that's in the wastewater fund or for some of these ones that are in the requested by departments in the reserve fund. You know, with your description of the, engineering work on Haystack and Midway, seems like that's a pretty small investment for next year in order to get that, as Bruce calls it, shovel-ready project.
Yeah.
If you would ask me to choose on this particular one, I would go with that project over the SDP. That'd be a relatively quick, thing to get done, and we would know what we were facing,
And then you would have it ready to go if funds come available.
And then that would just, as you said, that could come right out of the contingency from the reserve fund, and you're still gonna have an extremely healthy reserve, contingency there.
Right. So would one make a motion to move $10,000 from the contingency in the wastewater reserve to the Faucets and Midway upgrade? Is that the motion?
I think we usually,
You do it at the end?
at the end, we kind of talk about this change, or we could do it at this point. What do you think, Richard?
No, I just think if there's some consensus, amongst the committee, that we ought to think about that now. Or we can come back at the end of the meeting and revisit it.
Okay.
I mean, I think Bruce and Lori have put together a really conservative budget, and I appreciate that. But I think this one might be, maybe we went a little bit too far in the contingency amount, and we could free some of that up. That's just my thought.
Question for Lori. Comparing having funds in the reserve or having funds in the contingency, which one is the most accessible if Karen needs something for a project that's coming up?
Contingency, you are limited to 15% of the expenditures in the fund, so you would be limited to, 300,000 times 15%, so.
Are you on the reserve board now?
You get 10% and then half of it.
Yeah, that's how I do it.
Contingency is limited to 15% of total expenditures, which includes contingency. So actually, it's 460, I misspoke.
Okay.
460 times 15%, Karen, sorry.
So it'd be 60,
16%?
15, 1-5.
Is that a meaningful number?
It's about 70,000.
It seems like it.
70K.
69,000, you could move from there to fund the Midway, Saisla, bypass.
What would be the downside of planning on some of that now by putting it in the proposed budget as opposed to?
I would like to just see it listed as something to do, rather than, well, it's available if you want to do it, or if you decide.
Instead of doing it by resolution later?
Yeah, it's just saves time, it's already there.
Well, do I understand when you're talking about the 15%, that's 15% of the approved budget?
The total expenditures in the, yeah,
Right,
the eventual.
But if we were to move money now in the budget while we're still doing it, we're not limited to 15% of what the number is there.
Right now, well, you would be changing, well, it would still be the same. Because it's total expenditures.
He's talking about after the budget is, I think,
I'm talking,
correct me if I'm wrong,
like a
after the
reason-
budget is 15%, after it's been approved, correct? But if we do it now, we can do anything.
Yeah, you can take the whole contingency right now.
That's what he's thinking.
We're not doing that right now.
No, when you were saying 15%, we're not limited to that now.
No, later on, if you do by resolution.
Right after Lori and Marty explain.
Is there any kind of a consensus to do this, or we want to just move on?
I would like to know what Karen, if we did this, what Karen would apply it to. What you would apply the money to.
Well, the first thing I do is get the design engineering for Haystack. If I could do that quickly, and that would enable us to be ready when additional funds come, whether it be federal grant money, low interest loan, I know exactly what I needed, and I can move quickly on it.
And how much money do you need for that?
$10,000.
Yeah, just that one project, is I think what we're talking about, and that was what you were asking about, making the motion, yeah.
Seems pretty low risk, it's 10,000.
Yeah, I agree.
Should we do this?
10 grand.
So we're looking at moving 10,000 into that
Yeah,
line.
I think the way we're going forward, we're kind of at the end, we can summarize all of the changes, right?
Okay.
Yeah, this is our first change, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I mean, in previous years.
Well, correct, and I mean, yeah, sorry, we're chatting over here.
So that's page 88. Any other questions on the wastewater fund or wastewater reserve?
We'll hold off on the SECs, and if the revenue comes in, you want me to remind, council have that desire to have funds to pursue that review?
Karen, I would, since we're talking relatively small amounts, I would prefer that we move the SDC money in, because we're talking about it in other locations, we might as well get it all done. So I would probably do both of those, so that would be $25,000
Okay.
on contingency for SDC and,
There's an STC in 5 different,
So it'd be in water, wastewater, storm, roads, and parks is what the evaluation would be on. So each of those buckets would contribute to that overall review.
and that's not from a reserve contingency, that's from the main fund. Because the rate studies are done,
I would say it's from the main
So what's the total on the SDC? There's like 3 funds, it says 25 or 30? 30?
I would say 30, yeah. And there's 5 categories.
And then the rate study would be on top of that?
no,
I'm sorry?
Would the rate study be on top of that for utility rates?
No, we've done
You've
the
done together.
rate, yeah, this would just be for SDCs, because we've done the, rate module evaluation already, and council's already chose which model they're going with, so that's a done deal. This would just be for the SDCs.
Okay, we'll come back and make a motion, when we're finished going through the budget then for these 2 items.
Thank you very much.
So,
okay.
just a quick question on the amount. So it'd be 30,000 plus the 10, so, okay. So just a total of 40, yeah.
Richard, can I request a 5-minute break?
I'm sorry,
Can I request a 5-minute break?
you bet, sure. Take a 5-minute break.
come back at 25 up, like this clock?
Yeah.
It's always good to give it time.
Everybody's back? Is everybody here?
But there's not some kind of.
We'll call the meeting back to order a minute early.
No, it's just,
The next item on the agenda is storm drain fund, and, I'm assuming you'll talk about the reserve at the same time.
Yes, I'll do both at the same time, if that's okay. No significant change to the baseline on storm. And we have not asked for, desired projects on this particular category. However, I will say that, we do have the pending issue with OPRD.
What's that?
Which is they are, asking that we start treating the water that comes out of our outfalls. That's gonna be a major expense for the city. We have hired an engineering firm to evaluate the outfalls that we currently have in place, the functionality of those outfalls. They've done water testing. They're looking at the velocity of the water that's coming out, everything, to be able to present options to OPRD on what we could do to satisfy their, request for us to start, treating the water.
Are they doing this to all cities on the coast, or just us? Why?
That's what we'd like to know.
Yeah, that's pretty,
That's the million-dollar
Startling.
question.
have
However,
they threatened us or anything like that? or-
I'm sorry?
Have they threatened us?
Well, full exposure here, we did a long overdue, improvement on a collapsed, outfall that we had up on the north end. My naiveness, in my position with the city, did not do the due diligence to be aware that the pipe some years back had been extended beyond the vegetation line. So when we replaced the existing collapsed, deteriorated pipe, we put right back in what was already there. And that, caused a firestorm with OPRD. They became aware that that was extended. The good news is it works like a champ. The bad news is they don't like how it's out onto the beach at this point. So we had some options: cut it back to the vegetation line, which would impact the functionality of the outfall. We have some homes nearby that were being impacted, flooding as it's backing up. And so we had concern of just cutting it off and impacting the way that it's flowing. We tested the water to show OPRD that there was no hazardous impact to the beach. There is a, filtering of the water, if you will, based on the design that we have. We drew it out so they could see that the water actually goes through the sand, and it is a natural, it's almost like our sand filter beds out in our water treatment plant before any water goes out onto the beach. There's never been any significant flow of water coming out of there. It's a long pipe. So it's more of a trickle, if you will, but there's no doubt that water does end up out onto the beach, but it's not hazardous. They don't like it. They want us to treat that water.
Well, what about every other city in the state that's on the beach? They've got the same issue. I mean, if they're applying it unequally to Cannon Beach, then maybe we gotta
Start
dig
selling
our
even.
heels in or something. That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, it's been a challenge.
I mean, it's a big, the number jumped out when I saw the number you had there. I think,
Yeah, it's significant, and so now they've gone to the presidential and gone after that as well. And, over the course of the years with the, sand dune grading and things that have happened over the years, and those outfalls have been damaged, when the crews repaired them, and this has been years back, those pipes were extended. Again, I didn't realize that. We don't have good documentation that indicates that. None of the outfalls in the presidentials have been modified or changed, during my time frame, but they included that in their demand for us to start treating outfalls. So, we hired a firm to come do that evaluation and get some options of what could be considered there if they make us fulfill that. So, I've talked to other cities, Sam and Robin's been involved in it. I initially pushed back pretty vigorously and caused quite a bit of tension between the two groups because the money was significant. And I naturally wanted to try to protect the budget and defend what was out there. And caused some damage to the relationship, and I've done some repairing of that. And luckily, we're on the right track as far as that goes. They've been really good to work with us on the time frame that they demanded this. Originally, it was March 10th, I believe we had this in place. So they've given us some leniency on that, but they expect us to move forward on it. It's not a critical aspect of the functionality of the outfalls. They work perfectly now.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you're looking at over $300,000, $400,000, that's what this is.
Well, yeah.
Oh. But it's not in the budget for this year.
No. I noted it because it's something we'll have to deal with. They can fine us if we don't do it. But I didn't list it as a critical. If the outfalls weren't working or we were continuing to experience flooding of private homes that they could file insurance claims against us and things such as that, I would consider it critical. That is not at all what's happening.
Okay, so I have another question about, we've got a 2%, is it a 2% increase, 4%? The increase on the wastewater.
Yes.
$2.
$2.
Yeah, but we've got our contingency is going up from from 45 to 101. So why are we doing a rate increase if we're generating a bunch of extra money? Which, I mean,
Lori, does that include the general funds transfer down in the budget? Okay.
That's put in.
That was what we talked about last year, right? Because last year you said we needed like a $4 increase, and at budget last year, we talked about breaking it into two years.
Right.
Yeah.
But then if we look at it, the numbers, it looks like we're generating more than we need. And so I'm just questioning, do we really need to implement the rate increase this year? Or can we just let it ride? Why? We're building up $100,000 contingency fund.
But you could transfer it to the reserve, and the reserve is, you cut those projects out. The ones, the two park projects, so. If you had a surplus in the operating fund, you could transfer it to do those projects, right?
It wouldn't cover the full cost.
No, but I mean, that's the argument to have the rate increases, so that next year, you might have enough to do it.
Yeah, you're building up your money
Exactly.
to be able to do your projects.
Yes, we could add back the 10,000 for the rate study. Broken record. I said it.
Or give it back to the general fund that we took in the past.
Not in storm drain. Oh, that, yeah.
So how are we
So you're
gonna,
right, the general fund transfers that occurred.
I mean, I'm kind of talking on both sides of my mouth here, but how are you gonna pay for the $400,000 for the Parks Department requirements somewhere down the road? How is that gonna get funded? Is that gonna go into rates, or is it gonna have to be a loan, or how does that get paid for? That's a big number.
I would probably pursue a low interest loan.
Karen, how come there isn't any money,
Or maybe Lori knows this
answer, how come there isn't any money allocated for that this year?
For the issue of opioid use.
Yeah.
Just because in this year's budget, we looked at things that were critical, if it was a project, otherwise we stayed with just the essential to keep things functioning.
But we have a mandate from Parks Board.
To a certain extent, we do. I mean, it's a mandate that they see as a mandate if this council feels that that's the direction they want to go. We'd be the only city that has been asked this, and the only city that would put a treatment into outfalls. Our engineers makes a living off of, outfall evaluation. They've never seen any other municipality in the Pacific Northwest as a whole treat water coming out of an outfall.
So then, do we have an expenditure for fighting this? I mean, it sounds like we're just kind of saying, okay, let's tread this water as long as we can.
Well,
I'm not sure we can fight it.
there's enough money this year to do that project. The difference would have to come from, general fund. You know, there's whatever money we have that's in the reserve, plus whatever else we need to come in, we don't have, in my opinion, we don't have those funds.
Isn't it worth fighting?
We should get a loan, not a general fund.
If we're the only city that's been,
They'll make a decision.
But are they gonna be fining us if we don't start this?
They threatened to, but, Sam and Robin got involved and, they backed off on that. But they have expected us to move forward on it.
Yeah, but how long are they going to back off? I guess, I mean, it doesn't show that we have a good faith effort here to start doing anything on the construction of those.
Well, I give them regular updates. Our engineering firm knows of what phase they're in as far as the overall evaluation. We've given them preliminary options and asked for feedback, and they've declined to give us feedback. They'll set the expectation, but they don't give us direction. It's up to us to figure out how we want to address what they've asked us to do. I agree with Lori. I wouldn't necessarily advocate a general fund transfer to do this. I would rather see us do a homeowner's loan if we're going to pursue this. But I mean, honestly, I do feel, a little bit targeted as a city. No one anywhere has ever been asked to do this.
That's
quite
kind of a
unique.
separate issue, isn't it, in terms of?
I think it's worthy of negotiating. I mean, like I say, if there was something wrong, where there was something toxic or hazardous going out to the beach, I would see that we absolutely have something to talk about. But that's not the case.
And we did have that conversation, and
We backed up.
I have asked them to permit, allow me a permit to keep the outfalls where it is, to be beyond the vegetation, because they have afforded that in other areas. And so that is something that we could get, but they have declined to do that at this point.
So we're at a standstill in terms of.
Until the engineering firm comes back and says, you know, the options that they have given so far, they're going to the next step to be able to prove those out, show us for sure what that's gonna cost. These are preliminary costs that we're looking at right now. And to get those shovel ready where we could actually pull the trigger, if you asked me to do that, that's what we're trying to get to right now.
Lori, if we were to say, let's go ahead and fund this, how would we fund it? We were to say, let's go ahead and move the 340 over to the proposed by budget officer column. How would that 340 come from?
Well, I agree with Karen that I don't think the general fund should be, paying for that. I think the storm drain user fees should pay for that, and we could get a loan and pay debt service over a time frame of 20 years or more.
well, why aren't we fighting it? I mean, it just seems to me that I can't imagine that they have legal authority to go after one city and not every city. So there's gotta be some political or legal processes, and I realize you guys have maybe been involved more than I know about, but, that seems like a major issue that the Parks Department has created.
Now, what we're, as far as good faith, and to answer you, we are doing the engineering to find out what the level of concern we're gonna be running into. If it's an easy fix, it's a good thing to do. If it's not an easy fix and it's very expensive, it's not all on us, should not be all on us. So what I'm waiting for is for the engineering to come through and tell us, you know, how dramatic is this? At that point, I wanna have a discussion with Parks. Because, you know, here is something they're asking us to do, for whatever reason they've come up with. We need to have a good reason to do it. If it's gonna cost us a bunch of money and they're not chipping in, or they're not, you know, supporting us in any way. So, my weight is on the engineering.
So what's the engineering?
Yeah,
Excuse me?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Have you talked to land use attorney at all?
We talked about.
Wouldn't they be the ones that would help you fight this?
Yes, we did talk to land use attorney. And, they said that OPRD does have the authority, because we're out past the vegetation line. But what our concern, at least from the staff level, has been all along, is that we know there's other people in similar situations.
Well, that's,
We know that
precedent, there has
We know
to
that there's people that they had conversations with about installations, the same thing that we have, that they said, well, don't worry about it, but if you do it, try to do any more, you'll have to get a permit. So, and there are other locations that have the same situation. Karen meets with the public works directors of the other, communities, even down within into Tillman. And they're all like, I hope you guys don't do this, because it's gonna set a precedent for the rest of us.
Yeah, they're sweating bullets now.
So what's
Fill
the,
up to Astoria.
what are the dollars that you've got in here that were in the original budget? 340, and then,
There's locations.
what were those, was that for a project or for the engineering, or what is it?
Yeah, the 35 is for, a low end of a minor change that could be done up on the north end. Here's the dichotomy we're in, is we've given them 3 options for both areas of town. A kind of a least cost and a worst cost. The reason I presented it to them and asked for feedback is because I don't wanna go forward and do something and then they say, well, that doesn't cut it. I've wasted this money. So I was asking for feedback from them to say, which of these options do you feel would meet your expectations? And they declined to give us the feedback. So it's kind of like I have to feel my way through this and hope that whichever one I select, and obviously I'm gonna go with the least cost to the city if I'm mandated to do it. And if they say, well, nice try, thanks for playing, but that just still doesn't work. Now I'm chasing it again.
So, obviously this thing we're not gonna solve right here, but, I think Nancy brought up the good faith portion of this. Would it be advisable, we have a pretty big contingency here in this particular fund. Would it be, an option to transfer a portion of that to the storm drain reserve so that you are preserving that option of maybe having to do some work on one of these projects? Again, you're showing good faith that you're thinking about it from a budgeting perspective, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be spent on that if you get a decision with the discussions and that nothing has to happen. And there's no harm in it going really into the storm drain reserve, because there's always gonna be a project that you could work out of the reserve. And that way you kind of, move that whole, fall down the court a little bit without making a commitment to, we're gonna make this change.
Yeah, and where's the engineering coming from now?
Windsor Engineering,
This year's budget.
yeah,
This year's budget? So you don't think there'll be any more then? Or we
Sorry?
don't know? Or we don't know at this point?
We don't know.
Okay.
So,
Carolyn, you proposed,
I would suggest that, I already said add 10 for the rate study, but I would suggest that we transfer some nominal amount from the storm drain fund to the reserve fund, targeted to do maybe the, storm requirements north, so it's kind of there. And then, council will continue going on with and Karen with the discussions with OPRD and see where it ends up. I don't know, $20,000 or.
how much?
I like that suggestion, with the exception of if we, in a good faith effort, we take the low cost option and we modify the north end and it meets their expectation. Now that's set a precedent.
Right.
And we're almost obligated to do something in the presidentials, and now we've set something up for our sister cities to have to do the same thing.
But from a budget perspective, having it there, I think, shows the good faith that the city is continuing to work it, and, it's outside of the venue of the budget committee to, do that whole legal part and whatever, but, we're not, putting a stop on the forward motion that is happening with this particular project.
I like what Carolyn's saying, we just put some money over there. And then if, council decides to have that discussion, or we can be looking at loans or whatever. One thing when we're talking about loans, we, hit the jackpot with the, Business Oregon loan. I forgot there's somebody else that's involved with it. And that's the one that we were able to get more than 50% principal forgiveness. They won't fund this project. So, in the ones that we're looking at for, wastewater are out of DEQ. They have a very low rate, but they don't have a loan, principal forgiveness. So, I don't want anybody to get the idea that if we get a loan from them or from anybody, that it'll be, 50% off.
Right.
So, it may be, I don't know, and it's possible that if we're far enough along, it might get funded as a shovel-ready project if we're there. So, but, we have continued work, even once we shut down for, COVID. We did have them come into town, do the perk tests and some other things, and, they know that, I've let them know that, that work has been ongoing.
Them being OPRD.
OPRD, yeah.
Question,
The
just a
winters
question
in town
about,
and doing testing.
correct.
Yeah, it was right after we kind of shut down.
Question, if we're putting this a little bit into the reserve, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So that we could use it, it's not earmarked specific. So I was thinking if we wanted to use it for legal fees
Right,
or some other kind of.
I'd like to put the whole thing in the legal fees.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to see it cited, I just think that we need to also show them at least that we're making a good faith effort to follow their directions until we fight it.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you, legal fees, can that come out of the reserve, Lori, or would that have to come out of our?
Stay in the operating
So-
fund and fund that legal fee line.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there's anything in there right now, no.
So if we were creating it for legal fees, it should stay where it is.
Or you could fund that legal services line that has zero right now,
Right.
out of contingency.
If it's in the reserve, can we take it out of the reserve and put it into the legal fees? Is that what you're saying we can't do?
Yeah, once you put money into your reserve fund, you can't take it out.
But can you pay for legal fees out of the reserve fund?
No, the concept of this capital and major maintenance.
If it's in the funds in the contingency, can we use those for legal fees?
In the operating fund,
I mean, the contingency, of the operating.
yeah, you could leave it in contingency and then by resolution,
Pull it out.
move it up, yeah.
In the proposal is $101,000.
Right.
In contingency at this point.
So maybe just leave it alone at this point.
That's kind of my sense, but I don't mind putting a little bit into the capital bit of it.
The only, what I'm hearing is you put a little bit in the reserve, it shows good faith. Well, only if you go take this budget and say, look at our budget. You know, I don't believe they're going through our budget. If you got money, you can spend it. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but
No, I mean, if they expect it all to be done, they don't have to.
yeah.
I think the good thing is demonstrated in what we're doing with the engineering company and keeping OPRD apprised of our progress on that. And so far, they've accepted that as us continuing to move forward to truly vet this issue. I think we'll come to a fork in the road is the decision on, do we pull the trigger on it?
That sounds like exactly what contingency is for.
There's also something that, a little bit inconsistent here. On one hand, we're talking about water quality. On the other hand, the state pulled the money for the water quality program for this summer. So, and they've done it because of COVID. This project was, under normal conditions, would have been funded. I don't have that much problem making an argument that because of the situation that we're in, we don't have that money. We don't have the money to transfer, which we've usually done. So, I mean, that's up to y'all, but, the state is making some big changes. Pardon?
I have been thinking the same thing, that under these circumstances, they can't really say, I mean, we can show our income is down, so, you know, we can't afford it.
But the
And,
the state is also backing off
yeah,
of the same kind of things.
You can't afford it either.
Yeah.
So, why, just leave the budget alone.
Okay.
So should we leave it where it is and just not, okay. So if we've got any other questions about the storm?
So if we have that much in contingency, do we really need to have a rate increase?
Because you have projects out there that need to be funded later. You know, nobody complained at all when we closed it last time. I mean, we didn't get a bunch of calls,
If you do small ones annually, they just get used to it. The trick is to be consistent and little, not.
right,
It was 2% each year was what it was.
No,
You
it
get-
wasn't 2%.
maybe $2.
Yeah, it was
$2.
$2.
I'm sorry, $2.
It went from $5 to $7, and now
Right.
$7 to $9.
Right. But again, I mean,
And then
we can probably put that off now, but, consistently, we were transferring $80,000 to the general fund to keep this fund whole. And that's what we were trying to back off.
and I think the reason we were going with the rate increase in the first place is to pay for that $20 million, now $25 or $30 million, water treatment, or water plan, master plan, wasn't it?
I don't know.
This is,
The storm is
No,
separate.
it's just, I think it was because we needed to build up some reserves,
Yeah,
because when things go wrong, they're big dollar
right.
things with this, you know, and you need to build up, have a reserve.
The customers are used to seeing Pacific Power bills go up every year and garbage bills go up and and so when the city doesn't raise rates every year, people take it for granted that you don't need to, and so I think you need to be whole.
Okay, we'll leave it where it is. That sound right, okay to everybody?
Well, I would recommend that you move money to legal fees, myself. But I know you're not doing motions right now, so.
Any more comments on the wastewater? Excuse me, on storm, on storm.
Going backwards.
Okay, the roads fund.
Hey, Rose. Nancy, I'm gonna go back to your comment yesterday about, how we were able to give, reduced roads to the magnitude that we did this year. We actually reduced the roads budget by, I think, just a little bit over $100,000. The rest of that was the ending fund balance that carried over, that made up that total number you guys were looking at yesterday. But, something different that I've done since I got in the director role is that, the team explained to me that in prior years, my rank and file didn't really have a role in the budget. Most of them didn't even know how our budget worked. I mean, they spent until their director told them we were out of money. And so, when I built their work plans, I gave each department a budget responsibility, so everybody had skin in the game. We review the budget at every staff meeting. When the guys send me an email, or they call me, or they text me, and they say, this just broke, and we need a new one, and this is how much it costs, like, great, what bucket's it coming out of? So it forces them to look at the budget as their own personal budget to figure out how these things get paid for. Even when I know the answer, I still ask them the questions so that they join me in the ownership of our budget. That has made a huge difference in our overall budget. When my predecessor was here as the assistant director, I didn't have input to the budget either. Some people do budgets differently, not to say anything is bad or good or better or not. I just feel like with everybody having some skin in the game, people's spending habits become different. And so I've seen that our overall public works budget, the focus and the drive for efficiency has become more paramount, okay? So roads is a really good example of that. There's not a significant difference in, operating, it's just in the old, I can't point to certain line items, that you'll see some, obviously, the equipment and tools. We went from over 10 grand in 18-19 budget year to 3 grand last year, and we're holding it at that this year. So you'll see some of those line items. Contractual services, we've gone up a bit. We have a contractor that has a flail mower that can, cut our vegetation along Hemlock and up in some of our trail areas that our equipment just can't do. The guys can't take a weed eater by hand and make any ground on that kind of stuff, and I don't want them doing a weed eater up over their head for OSHA safety reasons. It's very dangerous, and this is what they've tried to do in the past because they don't have the tools that can mow up on a high embankment. Electrical services, you'll see that that item was cut significantly. We're holding that again this year. So little line items like that, but this is really the overall, just if you don't need it, don't spend it, let's cut it and give it back to Lori to do whatever she does with it, okay? The big one for this year is paving. We awarded an RFQ last year for 6 locations to be overlaid or paved. We have 4 of the 6 that are done, but we still have 2 streets that have yet to be done that are a part of that RFQ that was awarded, that we are liable to finish those. I stopped them when COVID happened because we hadn't broken the asphalt yet to grind to rebuild those. Those are 2 cul-de-sacs by the RV park. One is Crescent and one is Silver Point. They're in horrible shape. And as you know, we have a spreadsheet that prioritizes every street in Cannon Beach and identifies it as worst condition to best condition. Carolyn has been tremendous help in us keeping that updated, and we'll probably do another audit of town just to refresh that a bit. But we don't have any new streets planned for paving in this new budget year. So the only thing that we will do is finish off those 2 streets that are part of that awarded contract, and that is it. Let's see here. Desired projects. Warren Way, council had asked me quite some time back to bring back a preliminary design of extending the landscape and making that a 4-way stop. I have done that. We have the design, everything. It was on the agenda to bring to you guys, and then COVID hit. So I'm ready when I can get back on the agenda. My right-hand gal, Jennifer, has the small allotment application ready to go June 1st when that opens up to chase money to do that project. If you decided you wanted to pursue the design that I bring forward to you. Security camera, that's on the budget, was not funded. We had a couple of break-ins last year at our public works yard. We put 1 camera up last year. I went for the least expensive camera that would be a deterrent and tell us maybe who had come into the parking lot. It's on our building. That was my main concern, is keeping the person out of our building where all of our expensive tools are. I need another one that looks down where all of the trucks are parked along the fence. So if somebody jumps that fence and they break into one of the trucks, then they can steal a lot of tools out of the trucks. So that's what that request is for. It's not a big ticket item, but it does help us on our insurance when we have cameras and we have punch key locks. The insurance company recognizes that, just like you do your own home. If you have a burglar alarm, you get a discount. And if there's any question when a burglary happens about the insurance is gonna cover it or not, a camera pretty much makes sure you get your reimbursement. So, those are the 2 projects that are desired projects. I'd like to get funding for.
Talk
the
about,
other 2
Karen,
are.
talk about the dump truck.
Our small dump truck, the dumper that's on the back of the truck, when that was put on, it came close to its full ton capacity. So the minute we put anything in the back of that dumper, we have exceeded that truck's ton capacity. So
The box weighs as much as you're allowed to put on the truck.
we try to use it for just, yard debris when Joe and Kirk and the road crew are, doing vegetation trimming. But the bottom line is, we do need it for hauling rock to do potholes and things on our gravel streets. And if the guys had an accident, our insurance could easily say, why are you using a 1-ton truck and you have a 3 or 5 ton capacity in the back of it? I think this is a liability issue that the city should consider addressing as soon as possible. Rick and I have talked, if there's emergency management funding, I'd love to be able to partner with him and pursue this, because it's an item that we can use every day, but it also supports debris removal in any kind of a storm that we have, to be able to get debris out of here in large quantities. We could convert the existing dump truck to a flatbed. We can take the dumper off of it and either trade that in or sell that towards what we're doing with the new truck, and use it as a flatbed to move portable water tanks or whatever we decide. It's easy to forklift up things on a flatbed, and so it's not like we would just be junking that truck.
And that the loader
Yeah.
doesn't work for the kind of work we use a loader for.
Yeah, we have a loader now, but it's old. We're starting to get, maintenance repairs on that causes us to say, is it time to get a new loader, or, do we keep throwing money at the old loader? This loader's capacity to be able to move debris in an emergency, it's not the type of loader that we would be able to move large amounts of debris. We could push things out of the way and get it onto the right of way, but the hauling off, is not ideal for that. And so, again, we wouldn't just junk the existing loader, we could definitely use it in recycle for the yard debris, just to manage the volume of yard debris. Andrew could definitely use it there. So it's not like we would be getting rid of it until it just finally costs us so much to repair that we should. But again, from emergency management, those 2 items, as far as the dump truck and the loader, are priorities I'd like to see us definitely consider.
This year?
Desirable, definitely, if council would allow me, at least for one of them. The dump truck, I think, is the greatest priority. I'm most concerned about that. I put out an internal policy to my team that they are not to use it for anything other than, brush cutting, and that's a hard thing to do. It restricts their day-to-day needs, so.
Lori, do you have a suggestion?
Concern, this funds, resources from fuel tax. We've gotten some information that we may not earn the amount that the, state had originally estimated, because people aren't driving as much right now. And I know Colleen gave me some data on, she thinks there's gonna be a 40% drop there. So we really need to be careful that we get the revenues, the resources that are here in order to fund the operation as it is. So I'm really relying on that contingency amount as a buffer in case we do not get the fuel taxes that come in.
How much are they? We don't get that much, so do we? What are fuel taxes?
It's up here in resources, it's, state highway funds, $134,000.
Oh, okay. You think that'll be maybe half of that?
I don't know.
But not that.
Well, I mean, I really hate to see you cut the paving budget, because I think that's really important to maintain our streets. But it's the sign of times. I mean, we don't have the revenue to support anything.
No reason for me asking Karen to elaborate on the dump truck and the loader is that by all, if you just drive out there, you say, oh, they got a big loader and they got a dump truck. If you want to rely on us to be able to get things done, those are not the proper tools. And, to me, I don't care, it's like that too, I'd be happy to sell each one, or whatever it is, against the cost. But, I just think that those are things that, especially the truck, can't even let people use it.
If, my sensibility of it, if the dump truck has the ability to be refitted into a flatbed, and if that is usable for the crew better than what the dump truck is, I would pursue that. I don't know what kind of funding that would take, and, you know, that's a different cost, and, work that out. The other thing, you could look into a dump trailer, which would have the ability to haul some of the heavier gear, not as much, but you could do it. They would cost less than a new dump, either a bed or a whole new dump truck. I am a little concerned personally about the loader, because when we got the loader, it was the new big deal. We've never had a loader before. It was the greatest thing in the world. And they really fought for it. It took 2 years, just to convince us that it was necessary, because we've never had a loader before. Why did we need one? Now you're saying this one isn't worth it. We need a bigger one. I'm not comfortable with that.
I don't think I said it wasn't worth it. I think that sometimes when we ask for something, especially if it's something we've never had before, and we make a selection, we make a purchase, sometimes we learn things about that purchase. Just like buying a house or building a house, you say, I'd do this a little bit differently if I had a choice to do it again. So I'm not saying it was a bad purchase at all. I mean, we've used that loader a lot, and we would continue to. But just like our trucks, as they get older, it comes to a point where you have to decide when you stop putting money into something, right? And you go ahead and you say it's time to make a purchase versus continuing to throw money at it. But I think it lends itself more to what the multi-use would be from an emergency management. And I don't think that was considered at all when we first evaluated the loader.
It was. That was one of the big selling points.
Okay.
It was the fact that we would have this loader for
Moving
emergency.
debris off the roads.
Yeah, and so, the other thing is, you know, if we were talking about it in January this year, probably would have had a totally different conversation. Now we're looking at baling wire and 2x4s. So you gotta fix things rather than proposing new stuff.
Yeah.
Until we can start getting.
That's what's in the budget.
Yeah, and I know, that's what's in the, but we're talking about these potentials that, you know, at some point, I agree that an old rig needs to be swapped out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it as being that old yet.
Yeah.
Well, would you trade the loader for the one you really want? We need two.
Paul and us have talked about it with Rick. I mean, it would still be a case loader. Case is good. We have other case things that when we need maintenance and support, we get good support out of them. So I wouldn't necessarily, go that radically different. I think it would be something that would give us more, versatility. And Paul's explored and looked at several different types of loaders that have different types of arms that could be put on and dumped into trucks that, Ecology or some other type of company worked with us, and they brought big trucks where the loader could scoop up and sidearm it into a truck, where this loader doesn't typically, it doesn't have that type of function. It has a radius, but it doesn't have like a loading arm that can swing into a big, container to load debris that gets hauled off.
But we would look at how much we could get for it and making the purchase.
I think it's wise to have examined the situation here, but be aware of it.
I think the dump truck, we'd do the math both ways. If it was, a smarter thing to sell it and put that towards the purchase, we would do that. If we wouldn't get much out of it based on, the dynamics of what that truck is, and then, you know, we would take the dumper off of it and use it as a flatbed, because it runs, we've taken good care of it. It's not giving us problems as far as it's running, and the engine and whatnot, so we're not having to throw a bunch of money at it from that perspective. And we could use a flatbed truck in a lot of different ways.
Could you put the dumper on a new truck or a different truck, used truck?
I think we're just dealing with a reduction in revenue, and unless somebody can come up with some more money, I guess we have zero for those things this year.
Right, and that's shown here.
Okay, any other comments about, the road? Move to the bridge reserve fund. 100.
And really, there's no change there, it's prior year ending balance that was carried over.
I don't anticipate anything at this point, so.
I don't, but something I do have my eye on down the road, you know, we can only do so many things at once, although I try to do a whole lot, is, to have the bridge reevaluated, for resiliency. There's been several different, things told to me. I've gone through all of our documentation of when we had that bridge, reviewed many years back and, retrofitted. The engineer that actually did that is still with that same company, so I've been able to talk to him directly. But I think from, again, from emergency management and or from planning, from the north end to be separated from the rest of the town and an escape route, I think that bridge should be looked at again. The bridge is not failing. I think it's, from a perspective of saying, what can it withstand? You know, I don't think we had the funds originally to do the full evaluation that was desired. The engineer told me we did a pretty scaled down version of what was originally put on the table just because of the funding. So I think that's something that should probably be revisited. There could be emergency management grant funding for that. The county and ODOT are doing their own assessments of bridges. There may be some partnering opportunity there. We have a good relationship with ODOT and the county, so, if the opportunity presented itself, I'd love to be able to pursue that as well.
Karen, one thing you explained to me after you talked to that engineer is that we talked about a retrofit, but it wasn't a retrofit,
There
correct?
was a retrofit. People use that word really loosely, and I walked away thinking that that bridge had been retrofitted, but it had not. And so what the engineer explained to me was that what he called the underlings of that bridge would still remain if we had an earthquake, but an able-bodied person could walk across that, but that the subsurface of the top of that bridge would be gone. They said no wheelchairs, no vehicles could get across it, but someone that was able-bodied could probably walk across the underlings of the bridge and escape.
That's the piles and the beams.
Yes, and so, so that gave me a whole different perspective of the bridge. We did have it inspected. ODOT and the county did their inspections, and they came and inspected. We looked at that, it gave us a full report. There's no part of our bridge that's failing. And so that's good news. It's just a matter of what we could expect if we had some sort of an earthquake and or storm that would take that bridge out. And so I think it's important for us to know that from an emergency management planning perspective.
The big concern that I had was whether the water and the wastewater was tied to the bridge, because if anything happens to the bridge, you lose that capacity. And apparently a while back, they did it's like equivalent of, I guess, a directional bore, and went under the creek, and came up the other side. So that's separate from the bridge, and that's really good.
Yeah, it used to be tied to the side of that bridge, so all that was moved in this, so.
Okay, any other questions about the bridge? Debt service fund.
Okay, this is the fund where we levy property taxes to pay the debt service on our, GO bonds, two 2010 series and a 2012 series. Getting closer to payoffs, I see, maybe 5 and 7 years out, which is good. We also, do not levy the full amount to pay this full debt service. We, get a transfer in from the general fund, to support the wastewater geo bond. So that's where you see that money from the general fund coming in, $215,152. And so with those resources, we'll be able to pay the debt service of $628,575 next year.
Okay, any questions for Lori? Administrative Services Fund, page 110.
How are we gonna see this up?
Well, you can do it all.
Oh, we got Rusty here, he can talk about his budget, and Karen.
Are you gonna talk about the executive? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, if you would go ahead,
Okay.
please.
So these, this is an internal service fund. It has 5 departments, I think. Executive, finance, IT, central services, and public works. We accumulate the costs of, the staff that are assigned to this fund. It's more like an overhead. This fund is like support services for the different programs of the city. The public works fund, costs in here are distributed to the, public works funds that Karen has. And then the executive, finance, central services, and IT pretty much is spread out over, general fund, all the rest of the funds, including public works, but, the building official fund, all operating programs of the city have support services. So the executive fund, there's 2 FTE there, and you can see the personnel costs for that. And then materials and services, things that we need to purchase in order to run the executive department, legal services. You can see contractual services is reduced because, as Bruce said in his budget message, we were going to defer the, what's that called? Calling?
Oregon Records Management?
Yeah, the records management.
That's what that was?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, other than that, we basically, reduced materials and services quite a bit. There are no COLAs represented in any of these internal service departments. So that's the executive.
Question, Bruce, the, legal services, really think that it's going to go down? I mean, you got 120 requested, but 100 is going to cover all of Ashley's efforts this past pandemic?
I don't know, a lot of this was put together before these things were occurring. Since then, I'm not sure exactly where it comes out of, but since then, we also had a LULA appeal. And so those things, what I'm trying to do is account for the kind of stuff that I know is the day-to-day. We might have to move some money if it's not more than that.
Okay, and the next one is page 111, that's the finance department. And, personnel, staying flat. This is where we spend money on our audit fees, supplies. Reduced our training and education pretty much this year. $181,738.
The audit fee is Paul's,
Yes.
for that amount, he needs better jokes.
That's why.
Or none.
Yeah, clean up that he promises not to.
Yeah, we'll give him 59.
I'll refer that information to him. Pass that on.
I have to admit, his reports used to be like an hour long.
Really?
Oh, yeah. When he first started coming here, it was
Yeah, it's been on forever.
He's getting it down to like 10 minutes, that's great.
And is that okay?
He's making a lot of money then.
Somebody told him, make it 10 minutes.
Well, we hope he spends more than 10 minutes with the books.
Yeah.
Oh, you can bet on that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Most of the people that come and present are given a time budget. This is the expectation, you'll be done in 4 minutes. Or whatever, so.
Okay, here's the IT budget on 112. Basically, one FTE. And the bulk of materials and services is, software maintenance and services maintenance. Then moving on to central services, sort of a catch-all for things that aren't really directly related to finance. This is where I also, spend money out of. We have the insurance cost, that's in there, $148,000. And then we spend, we're paying for the electricity, natural gas for the building out of this fund. Bank service charges is a big one for credit card fees, that's, near the top of utilities and services. So there's no personnel in here, but it's just, expenditures for those types of things I just mentioned.
On the IT, Forestry would reduce that a little bit, I'd happily give this back to him.
Also need mine too.
You don't want all call going to you?
Yeah.
Turn it off.
And then we have the public
It's
works.
coming back on by itself.
And then we have the public works department, 3 FTE here, these are things that they spend directly on, management type activities, training, travel and lodging, their telephone expenses, and stuff like that. Kind of the same old story here, it's one of these.
I think we were getting tired.
But with no money to spend, we can.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
that's our internal service fund.
Any, questions for Lori on, administrative services?
Just one. Can we assume that we won't spend any money on the council for things like the, conference?
We reduced that.
I saw that, I just wondering if that,
Probably more.
that's one I assume one of the biggest expenses.
It's really not, but we did reduce it, and the idea was that as we get further along on things, might be good to have somebody go to League of Cities, might be good for somebody to be at the city manager's conference, that kind of thing. But we cut it way down.
Okay. That's just my only concern.
Sure.
We sent one person instead of all of them.
Well, I'm not even sure they'll have it this year.
Well, no, you know, the city manager's conference, they're talking about doing a lot of it, the Zoom. I've not heard what would be going on. So last I heard, they hadn't decided what they were gonna do with League of Cities, because it's October or something?
Yeah.
September.
October? Yeah, so I think they were still trying to make a decision.
Last I heard for the mayor's conference, it was a go because it's in North Bend and they don't care. So, I'm not going. And,
You know, we had my finance conference March 1st in Seaside, and we had a huge group of people. And we were all sitting, dining together at these round tables on March 1st. And I'm like, my gosh, and I haven't heard anything about anybody getting sick, you know? It's like, whoa.
Dodge the bullet.
Yeah. And they're like, whoa, okay.
Pauline, did you?
Well, I was just gonna say, I'm on that, for LOC, I'm on their conference committee, and they're looking at doing virtual, sessions. And, because they realized that even if the pandemic and all that's over, most cities won't have much money, and maybe more of the councilors, everyone could attend virtually
like we do something, so that's the way they're looking at it.
Yeah, I'd actually,
I never been at Zoom.
Thank you.
More, questions about administrative services?
Can I go back and just touch on something I want to clarify to make sure I didn't confuse council with something? My right-hand man in the back there just texted me and said, Sam, you made a comment that led him to believe that I might have communicated which loader we were talking about. So I'm not talking about the big cat loader, I'm talking about the case loader. That's 15 years old, and so that's the loader we're talking about replacing, not the cat. I think you were referring to the cat loader. When you said it wasn't that old, that's not the loader we're talking about replacing.
It's the old one. We love the big new one we got.
Yeah,
It's the older one.
Thank you,
the
Trevor.
old case loader.
Thanks, Trevor, that does change things. It's not in the budget, but.
Thank you.
Still a good new one. But still a good try, Trevor.
Thanks for clarifying that, Karen. Okay, we'll move on to the RV Park Fund, which is, page 69.
Okay, the RV park, that first column requested by department, that information came early on from Escape Lodging to help me develop the budget, and, there are a few things in here that, they don't, spend, for operations. Like we apply some, charges from our internal service fund, you see that in the materials and services section there, exec and finance. That $5,000 is something that we control, as well as the insurance for the fuel tanks over at the RV park, and the facility maintenance, we control those costs. The other, RV park overhead and RV park management fees, those are, originated by the management, of the RV park by Escape Lodging. So this first column, they submitted to me early on, and we put it in, and then, I talked to Sean Wagner over at Escape Lodging, and I said, you know, what kind of budget did you give me, because this was looking like it's a lot, and he said, yeah, that's a normal times budget. I said, really? I said, okay, well, I guess if that's what you think we should do, you know, like, try to play it normal and then see how it happens. So I put it in, and I had the same amount in the proposed by budget officer, and then I think Bruce got to thinking about it, and we go, let's get some different numbers here, because this just isn't realistic for the time. And so I contacted Sean, and he redid the numbers, and that's what you see in the proposed column. It's not significantly different, but he did give me a summary of what he changed, and he said July, August, and September revenues, he changed 75% of the normal year. October, he adjusted down to an 80% normal year. And we're talking like revenues now up here in the resource section. So that 2.1 went to 1.9 million. And then he said November and December, 85%, and then January through June, 2021, 90%. So he's thinking very optimistically, which I think is fine. They also took some repair and maintenance operational costs out. The original budget was $54,750, and they left $24,000 in. So there was
Just a good question, will they be impacted for revenue, are they gonna be impacted by the council's decision earlier today to open up? Can they open up for rentals on the 26th or whatever date you?
Stay in hotels, right?
I think, I'm still thinking that through, because I thought that the governor said that RV parks could be open now. And so, that might be something that we want to consider, but I did want some guidance from the council on what was going to happen with the hotels first. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so it, and I would think that the RV thing would be, because they're kind of isolated in their unit, it would be, maybe recover faster. I mean, I see RVs driving around on the streets now, I'm assuming there are people that are passing through, but.
Yeah, because we're totally closed now, but, that, now that we've got the 10-day window, because they have to ramp up also. The only thing that we've done is kept it open, to have a gas station in town, but all the other operations were shut down.
I have a question on the gas stations. We had a presentation showing how they desperately needed new pumps, and I don't know what happened. It's not
It's in the works.
If they came out of this
Fiscal
year.
year.
out of this year's budget.
And, we were gonna purchase a truck for them so they could get around. They were using some little, what's that called, Karen?
Golf cart.
Yeah, golf cart. They wanna be able to drive to Costco, pick up supplies and that kind of thing. So we had originally agreed to do that, but now that's gone. And we gave them a loaner truck. I think it was your Ranger.
We gave them a little Ranger from Parks.
So they are able to get around and get, over to Costco and that kind of thing.
Better known as a spider truck.
Oh, yes. Thanks for reminding me, the spider truck. I don't miss it at all.
It was a pool truck that some found spiders in, so it became a less popular pool truck.
All public works trucks have spiders in them.
They're working cobwebs. So that is the budget you see here, and we still have contingency is 8.6%. So hopefully, we'll see how it goes. Sean is optimistic, and so I'm rooting him on.
We don't see any transfers in or out at this point.
Laura, I do have one question on the transfer from this current year, where it says on the RV park fund that $100,000 was going to the RV park reserve fund. But when I flip over to the RV park reserve fund, I don't see a transfer in.
So, I think that might be a software issue, and I made a note today to check those columns when I moved from the accounting software to the spreadsheet. Sometimes it needs me to delete the cell and then hit backspace and it repopulates, and so I think that's just a population problem. I'm gonna check the whole entire budget, all the past years, before you get the next version.
Okay, so it did go in, because when I look at on the RV park reserve at the unrestricted fund balance for this year starting, it appears to have $100,000 in there.
It goes
So
from 15
probably, we
to,
made the transfer, that's
Okay.
why it's reflected there, it's just that column, we fixed that up.
but you're not expecting to spend anything out of that at this point.
No.
Any other questions on the RV park or RV park reserve fund? Any public comment, anything come in, Rusty, was anybody, any public comment at all? Okay. Okay, so I have on my list that we talked about, under sewer, we talked about putting $10,000 into this Iusala engineering on page 88. Is that, do we have a consensus that we'll do that, we'll transfer that money?
I'm in agreement with that.
So we had, and Lori, we're gonna let you figure out where that comes from.
So let's walk through this here. We're gonna add the 10,000 into the proposed column.
Right on page 88,
Yep, in there.
we had an old 10,000, we're gonna reestablish that.
And the capital outlay, and then we'll, take it out of the contingency line, correct?
Okay.
Correct.
Right, and I think we also had, the next item that I have is SDCs, which is 30,000, and that, but that's in a bunch of different.
Yeah, it shouldn't come all out of that contingency, we were talking on the break.
Right, but it's in different funds, some of it's in, sewer, wastewater,
Yeah, we all
wastewater.
thought that the water, wastewater, storm, and we're adding roads and parks to that, so we should account the funding for that, so that the water, wastewater, and storm would have been the 30. Because we've got roads and, parks, we should recognize that funding-wise, so what did we say, Carolyn, 50?
Yeah, that would be 10 out of each of those 5.
Yeah,
funds.
so
So
your
it's
total
gonna, so it's, the change is gonna be 50,000 rather than 30,000?
I think, well, one of them, wastewater, which is on page 85, already had 5,000 in the proposed. So it would be adding 5 to that, and all of the other ones had zeroed out.
Correct.
That.
So it'd be
We're gonna add 10 to the
Yeah,
5.
the 5 was for something.
Something else.
Oh, okay.
So it's gonna be 50,000 total? Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
We're
Okay,
just gonna add 10 to whatever's in the proposed side on each of these.
Where it's zero.
Yeah, and then the parks, we'll just take that out of, ending fund balance. Is everybody okay with that? That's the general fund, so it'll be adding that to materials and services, reducing ending fund balance.
okay, and then,
And then the rest of them, we will add into the materials and services and reduce contingency.
okay. So then the last thing I had, and I don't think we had a consensus, but we talked a lot about, the storm. And I think we're not gonna make any changes to the budget there, but we talked a lot about legal.
Can I just stop right there? Do we need to start it up again?
I don't know, I was trying to reconnect, it's still my fault, and that one.
So we have lost our connection to the outside world, is that right?
But since we're at the point of making decisions, I would like to have it recorded.
Okay.
So, we can take a 5-minute break. Everybody back at 10 minutes on.
All right. Sorry about that.
Hey, I don't know what it's doing.
Out of door?
If we have to, I'll just set the recorder on.
Yeah, I don't have internet.
You don't have internet?
Yeah, North County is not tied to the.
Yeah, I lost connectivity to the Wi-Fi went down, or to the...
I guess the public works could have used the case baffle.
You want to talk about saving money, I want to get this recording going, man.
So do you think that's what happened, we lost the other one?
Do you have internet on your phone?
Yeah, I do.
Then it's me that went offline.
I had it literally clear.
No,
Yeah, I got it.
my Wi-Fi went offline.
But I'm on the visitor side right now. Are you on the visitor side?
Well, my personal phone's doing the same thing.
Everybody.
I'll check every time.
It's Lincoln Green.
Right, yeah.
I'll let the check all the phones and all
Right, thank you, right. But then, it was good to all do on the, the timing and then.
It could be a while.
It was actually. Yeah, I know, have to remember all again. It's gonna disappear in a couple. All these spreadsheets and all these emails and. I'm trying to remember the children.
Yeah.
Still are. And
Maybe we can get this to work, I'm sure it's the way I typed it.
Are you doing your capital?
I can't start.
Dollar sign?
Dollar sign and actually.
Zero.
Question mark on mine.
Exclamation at the end.
Oh, dollar sign, okay.
Remember you were having a challenge.
And the double martini.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's start. I know, I keep looking at it. Oh, I didn't see that. And he brings up Jason. And all sorts of. Here, let's wait a minute. Can you send that to me, by email, to my email address? Sure. When I tried to pick it up from here, all I got was, something about the Coffee Society and tie in, how can we help you? And I thought, I don't know if my name is associated with it. Now, what's Robin? Yeah, I didn't understand it at all. Yeah, I did. Okay. I'll send it to you later. You don't work like that. Yeah, no. No. My phone is all filled up, so.
I have nothing.
I will get it back home and I've got to send my pictures to the cloud or something like that. Oh, yeah. This is only a 5C, so I don't have to see.
Very easy right here. There I
I keep getting messages from Apple saying, oh, you're in that interested, I think that's the first last year. Storage and settings, because I haven't finished it. Oh, golly, it was like it made a lot of sense. How is, reporting, writing? I've only been doing property.
I'm having right now is that it's actually really done.
I worked with Julie Radis. Oh, yeah.
Well, the, guest is so.
They did say, if I were in my caliber, I mean, nice, yeah, but I'm not going from 6 to 10. Well, a lot of those towns are, we were built ahead. So a lot of them have that. I was built in 2009, so yeah. It hasn't been well, what it is like, the story of exactly alike. And they have an elevator. And so you rent out the bottom, 4 bedrooms on the bottom floor. Yes, it is, I'm going to the Palisades up to the left, off to the right, it's flat, except for where the gate is, oh, okay. I don't want just one, I came from a survey. Okay, I wasn't at a degree. Bob, do you remember Bob?
It's gonna be 15 or 20 minutes literally before I can get started back. So, I was in the corner of the handheld. It'll work fine for this in here. But I can't get sold back.
Hey, Jen?
Yeah, they're nice.
Color on it, it'll work.
I like that. One way in, one way out. It's on the microphone.
Turn the microphones on.
Yeah, except for the recording of the work that we do, we didn't go to meetings, so I think it's recording the very free.
Well,
Love that.
on our landline.
We can call it from the starfish.
And then we can
Set up the handheld in the
set up
background.
the handheld. The final portion of it.
Are they gonna, yeah, they are gonna keep going. Yeah.
Peter on perfection.
I need it again.
10 feet away from me.
I have no magic wand right now.
No, we're gonna color on the starfish. We're gonna go old school.
I wonder if the
So,
Legion,
but I got an assignment from.
the Legion was gonna open at 3 days.
Especially my hand got
Cutting back quite a bit, yes.
letting it convert it, and you're at the mercy of waiting for it to finish, which is gonna be another 20 minutes.
Is there a line outside?
I didn't have to write it in mine, but, it's for instance, I think the realtors do pay pretty well for that.
Finish though, I don't want it to happen before I next day.
Do you know she was at a 436 number?
No, she was attached via Zoom.
No, was she?
Yeah.
Well, we'll try the 436.
Who was? Emily?
Oh, it says it's in a call. Oh, because it was in the.
I don't know how, did you know?
So the next day you can either
That's, I think, for me. No. Hello? Yeah, I've been able to hear you the whole time. I mean, you're really loud. That's good. What? Oh, it crashed at your end? Okay. Okay, that's fine.